Go.
So welcome everyone to YTH Live's 2020 opening keynote. I'm Vignetta Charles. I'm the CEO of ETR, Education, Training, Research, and YTH Live is a critical and dynamic annual event of the Youth Tech Health Initiative at ETR. And it really highlights the intersections of youth, technology, and health innovation to address the globe's most pressing issues. And this is our first year ever going virtual, which happened due to the circumstances of the pandemic that is fitting for a youth tech and health conference. And also fitting is that our opening keynote speaker to launch YTH Live is an award-winning physician, researcher, advocate, and real pioneer in the study of adverse childhood experiences, ACEs. And you're really changing the way that our society responds to one of the world's most widespread and pressing public health crises, childhood trauma. So really want to welcome Dr. Nadine Burke Harris, who's California's first Surgeon General. I have known you for a long time, so I will call you Nadine. I just want to make sure that folks know that. Your bio is far too long to read, but I really do want to highlight a couple of things for your incredible career. So you founded the Center for Youth Wellness, a clinic in one of San Francisco's traditionally most underserved communities, Bayview Hunters Point. You founded and led the Bay Area Research Consortium on Toxic Stress and Health, which really advanced a model of scientific screening and treatment of toxic stress. Your TED Talk, which I've seen many times, how childhood trauma affects mental health across the lifetime, has been viewed over 6 million times. And your book, The Deepest Well, Healing the Long-Term Effects of Childhood Adversity, which is extraordinary, has been called indispensable by the New York Times. You are really one of the most influential leaders in California, the nation, and increasingly the globe in how we combat the root causes of health disparities. And we couldn't thank you more for being here today and agreeing to do this keynote to launch YTH Live 2020. So thank you for joining us, Nadine.
It is my pleasure to be here.
Awesome. So you are California's first ever Surgeon General. And so can you lead just talking about what some of the priorities of your office are at this time?
Yeah, well, coming into the role of California's first Surgeon General when Governor Newsom created the idea of having a Surgeon General for California, we really agreed on 3 key priorities for me in my office. One was early childhood. The second was health disparities and health equity. And the third was adverse childhood experiences and toxic stress. And so I've really focused my time, coming into my role, I started out really launching an initiative that was kind of a marriage of all 3 of those called the ACEs Aware Initiative. Where here in California, we have had a really big focus on doing what the research shows, which is that when we understand that early adversity harms the development and the short and long-term health, not only of kids, but all the way into adulthood, right? Then looking at the science and seeing that it shows that early detection and early intervention improves outcomes. Here in California, we launched a really first in the nation effort called ACEs Aware to actually kind of train primary care clinicians on how to screen for adverse childhood experiences. And for once, it is not an unfunded mandate. We actually put money behind it, which was amazing. And so now, doctors, healthcare providers in California actually get reimbursed for screening on about adverse childhood experiences and responding with trauma-informed care. So that's something I'm excited about. So that was kind of day one coming in.
No, that's incredible, and it's incredible for you to launch and in your first few days be able to get sort of a funded and sustainable reimbursable model for the ongoing impact of toxic stress and childhood experiences across the lifespan. And so that is amazing. And then you started, and then here we are in the midst of a global pandemic, and simultaneously in our state and across the globe, we're also having Black Lives Matters protests and increasing visibility on racial inequities. And so how is that impacting you and your work?
Yeah, well, obviously, Being the Surgeon General in the middle of a pandemic is hectic. But it's amazing. There's this, so my background, my training, my research is on how stress affects our health and development, right? And then came this global pandemic, which is this massive stressor. And what we're seeing is, mental health. People are really, really struggling with mental health, mood, the stress, all of these things related to the pandemic. And the other thing that we see with the pandemic is that the remedies that are required to mitigate and prevent the spread is staying away from other people, right? Staying at home. And all of the research shows us that connection and community and safe and stable and nurturing relationships are healing. So we see this huge stressor. We see this, real barriers to the natural connections and supports that would mitigate those stressors. And then on top of that, I think the world, and I think certainly for me, but I think that for every person of color that I know, and also honestly for most people that I know, if they watched the George Floyd video, that's vicarious trauma right there. Just watching it was traumatizing. And I think that what's happening now is that so many people are awakening to the extent that racist beliefs and attitudes are this ongoing source of harm, trauma for our Black and Brown communities. And it's deeply, deeply connected to the work that we're doing here in California, because now we understand when we talk about toxic stress, and when I say toxic stress, what I mean is the ways in which our biology changes as a result of exposure to severe or prolonged stressors. So it's like, changes to brain development, changes to our hormones. Believe it or not, our immune system responds, right? So we have increased risk of infection, increased risk of autoimmune disease, inflammatory disorders, right? So these are part of the reason why we see some of the health disparities that we see. And it feels a little bit amazing that this all came together just as we were standing up this program in California to train every doctor on how to recognize the ways in which trauma and chronic stress affects people's health, and gives them tools as to, how do they respond to that and what they can do to mitigate those harms. So it's been a little bit of a perfect storm, but my hope is that the work that we're doing here in California not only goes quite a ways to helping provide tools for healing in our communities, but that it's also, nation leading work as far as being able to respond to, stress as a risk factor for health.
So thank you for that. And YTH Live, the youth part, YTH centers youth. And so when we're thinking of youth and adolescent health in this context that you just described, right, where, critical milestones like graduations and, transitions into adulthood are being missed while we're simultaneously having youth share that they're also feeling isolation and stress and loneliness. And so what should we be thinking about in terms of addressing these needs specifically for youth and adolescent health at this time?
So if there's like one thing that I can say, it's connection. And I think the thing that's really positive about that is that I think youth may be more accustomed to connection in the digital age, right? Creating meaningful connections in the digital age than, us old fogies. But I think that piece is absolutely critically important. What the research shows us is that there are a number of things, but that connection, healthy relationships is really important We also talk about sleep and exercise and nutrition and mindfulness and mental health, right? All are part of being able to combat this toxic stress response. And I think that the other thing that I would add to that is, maybe not the thing that was published in the peer-reviewed article, because that's, I talk a lot about, this is what the research shows in these, sleep and exercise, nutrition, mental health, all of these things really important. But I think the other thing that we're seeing in this moment is purpose, right? And that's the thing about what's happening now with youth raising their voices and saying, you know what, all the structural racism, no way. Channeling that we are going to begin to dismantle these systems. And that is one way in which I think folks take trauma, they take everything we're witnessing and experiencing right now that in many ways feels intolerable, and then they transform that energy into something powerful that changes the circumstance for the next generation. And that's what I think that purpose and that transformation feels really powerful.
So I love that. And I love that, right, you identified that youth really have moved faster into a digital world and feel more comfortable in a digital world than sort of many of us, right? And so how do we center that? How do we learn from youth and really have the youth-centered and the digital health and the digital age-centered focus on equity really translate across, right? Youth have always led many movements, as you're talking about, and youth are really driven by the purpose, as you're describing. And so how do we let that energy and the youth-centered energy sort of trickle out to the rest of us, right? So who may not have been as comfortable in the digital world as others. So.
Yeah, so I think that when we're thinking about how we kind of learn from the youth-centered digital age, the thing that comes immediately to mind is the way in which that we've seen youth expressing their voice and showing up, particularly in terms of like political expression or political participation. And what's interesting, there was lots of talk about whether or not youth had an influence in any of the large political rallies that happened, right? And I think the point there was not necessarily whether youth were successful in disrupting the rally or not. For me, when I kind of heard the news reports about that potentially having happened, what I took away from it was that level of organization and engagement, the way in which youth really recognized, hey, these are my tools, and I'm going to deploy my tools to express myself in a way to try to advance the cause that I believe in, right? And so that felt so powerful to me, like to see young people know their power, right? Yeah. And so that piece around how are we learning from youth in the digital age, I think it's really around owning your power, right? And that hey, fine, if you're a K-pop star or whatever, own your K-pop and express yourself with your K-pop, whatever it is, And I think that piece, that would be one piece. And then the other piece I would say, again, is really thinking about how we are utilizing technology for connection and healing, right? Whether it's, what's happening with some of these mindfulness apps that folks are using. That's more my generation, but, some of these mindfulness apps to recognize that we can use technology for good, for healing, to address loneliness, to address you know, some of the stress and the challenges that we're feeling right now.
Yeah, again, this is, I totally agree. It's so inspiring and powerful. At last year's YTH Live, we had a design challenge around sort of sleep, right? You know, because sleep is a major issue for youth. And some of the ideas were just extraordinary. And I was hoping that you know, any of the tech innovators in the audience would just, you know, go to those youth and say, we need to, you know, hire you and have that, that IP developed into those apps. And so, you know, the inspiration of using the technology to, as you're saying, sort of own your power and express it in ways that can just, you know, have more massive impact than we've ever had before, right? You know, so the fact that anything can go viral, right? You know, and it's a very different term now, right, is amazing.
Yeah, exactly. But this is the thing, and this is the thing that I take away from the youth, because I think the digital natives, the generation who grew up doing their stuff and putting it on YouTube, and then all of a sudden you're a YouTube star, or you're putting, or TikTok, right? You're putting something up on TikTok and all of a sudden it's got like 10 million views. I think that this generation is recognizing their ability to innovate, to influence, right? To inform, like all of those pieces in a way that, I don't know, it feels like it was a little different than when I was a youth.
Yeah, exactly.
And then like, when I was a kid, I did not assume that I could reach, 6 million people.
No.
And so I think that feels incredibly exciting.
Yeah, that sense of owning your power, and everyone can have that power, right? And that, it's a great equalizer in a lot of ways. Sort of the digital health and the digital natives, as you're saying, as we have sons the same age, and he's always helping me. He's like my IT support, right? And I'm like, you're 9. How do you know? But I was like, but that is, that happens. So what is your final message to youth and youth allies, and how they can participate and get involved? And, you're a great model in terms of how things can be both state, regional, and then global impact. And so, what would you say that are those messages for folks who want to get involved in these critical health needs?
Yeah, I think so the things that I say to my sons all the time is, you are powerful, right? And helping them, really kind of driving that home. I think that's really important. And I think that a lot of the solutions for some of the biggest challenges that we're seeing, right? Whether it is, how we are setting some norms around COVID and social distancing and wearing a face covering and, staying home to save lives and all of those pieces, or whether it's around how do we connect with each other, to check in on each other, make sure we're okay, make sure that anyone who is struggling, right, has that we're deeply maintaining our social connections, or whether it's developing innovations to solve some of our most pressing challenges, or even recognizing that structural racism is a public health crisis, that it is intolerable, and that that all of us, from the youngest of the young to the oldest of our most senior members, have a powerful role to play in righting those wrongs, right, that are still persisting. I think that I feel like I have so much hope in this generation, in what's coming out of this generation, and in how we are, in what things are going to look like, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years from now. I mean, having the conversation, I will say I had a conversation with the California Department of Education. We were talking about racial injustice and in the educational setting. And the conversation was entirely led by youth. And youth were really, educating us and suggesting ideas for, some solutions to some really big problems. So I just, the piece that I would say is don't underestimate the power that you have to change. And it just fills me with hope to see what young people are doing right now.
Well, thank you. Talking to you, of course, also fills me with hope, right? And one of the things that has been a thread throughout your career has been in, no matter what role you were in, you were listening to the children and youth that were coming through your life, were coming into your clinic, and you listened deeply, right? And you found those patterns, and you used your position and your platform to amplify their voices and their needs. And so that is just a sort of quintessential piece of what YTH Live is about. And really thank you for being the opening keynote for this year's first ever virtual conference from the first
thank you. Can I just throw in one last word on something that I just, okay, so yeah. So this is what I'll leave you with. So when I started doing the work that I was doing, when I opened the clinic and I was doing this work and I was hearing from my patients that really trauma and adversity was really affecting their lives and affecting their health and all of this stuff. And I, went out and I decided I'm going to shout it from the rooftops. I got to tell people what's going on. And when I said it, I said to folks, we have to change the system, right? Like we have to systematically address adverse childhood experiences. We got to be doing trauma-informed care. And certain people looked at me like I was crazy. They were like, what do you think you're going to do? How do you think you're going to solve this? And it was really funny. I felt like if I had gotten that feedback and then just, come back to doing my day-to-day work, I might have been discouraged. But what happened was I got that feedback and then I came back to my patients and my families, and they told me, no, you're right on. Like, this is what is affecting us. We do need to change these systems. And, whoop, whoop, fast forward a few years, I'm California's first Surgeon General, and we just launched the first statewide effort to train all of our doctors on how to screen for adverse childhood experiences and respond. So when those people come to tell you, like, you can't do it, you're out of your mind, you can't change the system, all that kind of stuff, just keep on doing what you know in your heart, in your experience, and in your integrity is the right thing, and you will get there.
Thank you for that. And thank you for owning your power so we can all be better for it. So lovely to see you, Nadine, and welcome everyone to YTH Live 2020.